The Grand Hall of the United Earth Embassy sparkled under the light of 1,000 crystal fixtures. Delegates from 27 alien civilizations mingled with human representatives, their strange forms creating a living mosaic of galactic diversity. This was humanity's coming-out party. Barely 50 years after discovering faster-than-light travel, Earth had finally secured membership in the Galactic Alliance. Captain Jack Reed tugged at the high collar of his dress uniform. He wasn't used to formal events like this. As head of security for the embassy, he preferred action to diplomacy. His broad shoulders and tall frame stood out among the mostly smaller alien delegates. "Captain, your attention please," his earpiece crackled. "The celestial delegation is arriving. Princess Lyra is with them." Jack nodded to his security team. The arrival of the princess from the Celestial Imperium, the oldest and most powerful civilization in known space, meant everything had to be perfect. Humans were still seen as primitive newcomers by most species, especially the ancient Celestials, who had been traveling between stars when humans were still figuring out agriculture. The main doors slid open. The room fell silent as the celestial delegation entered. Tall, elegant beings with faintly luminescent skin moved with perfect grace. Their high-necked robes flowed like liquid silver. At their center walked Princess Lyra. Jack caught his breath. Unlike the silver-skinned members of her court, the princess had a subtle blue tint to her skin that seemed to change hue as she moved. Her eyes were large and almond-shaped, with vertical pupils that reminded Jack of a cat's. Unlike the stiff formality of her court, something in her expression seemed curious, almost playful. Ambassador Chen stepped forward with practiced grace. "Your Highness, Earth welcomes you and the noble Celestial Imperium. We are deeply honored by your presence." The princess's translator hummed softly as she replied in a musical voice. "The honor is mutual, Ambassador. My father, Emperor Zorn, sends his regards and his hope that Earth will bring new energy to the Alliance." The formal introductions continued as each human diplomat was presented. When Jack's turn came, he bowed as he'd been instructed. "Captain Jack Reed, Your Highness, Head of Security." The princess tilted her head slightly. "A protector, then?" "I just try to keep people safe, Mom," Jack replied with a small smile. One of the celestial advisors frowned at Jack's informal response, but to everyone's surprise, Princess Lyra laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like glass wind chimes. Honesty. How refreshing. Her eyes lingered on Jack's face a moment longer than necessary. As the evening continued, Jack kept a professional distance, watching the room for any security concerns. But he couldn't help noticing how the princess seemed to be going through the motions with the high-ranking officials, but showed genuine interest when speaking with humans of lower status. The servers, the musicians, even the maintenance staff. Later, as a human string quartet played, Jack caught Princess Lyra alone by one of the large windows overlooking the night skyline of New Geneva. "Your people make such beautiful music," she said without turning. "It's emotional in a way our compositions are not." "I'm no expert, Your Highness," Jack replied, "but I've always thought music needs a little heart behind it." She turned to him then, her eyes catching the light. "And what does heart mean to humans, Captain Reed? I've studied your languages, but some concepts don't translate well." Jack thought for a moment. "It means we put our feelings into things. Joy, sadness, hope, all of it. And you value this, emotional expression. Most of us think it's what makes life worth living." The princess seemed to consider this deeply. "Tomorrow I am scheduled to tour your cultural centers. Would you accompany me, Captain? Your perspective is different from my usual guides." From across the room, the celestial advisors watched with clear disapproval. Jack knew that accepting could cause diplomatic complications. "I'd be honored, Your Highness," he said anyway. As Princess Lyra smiled, Jack had no way of knowing he had just set in motion events that would change the future of the entire galaxy. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Jack waited at the embassy entrance. He had swapped his formal uniform for the more practical field dress of Earth's Space Command, dark blue with silver trim. Princess Lyra arrived with only 2 guards instead of her usual entourage. She wore simpler clothing than the previous night, though the fabric still shimmered with an otherworldly quality. "Your advisors didn't look happy about this arrangement," Jack said as he guided her to the waiting transport. "My advisors are rarely happy about anything I do," she replied with a hint of mischief in her voice. "Where are we going first, Captain?" "Call me Jack, and I thought we'd skip the official cultural centers. If you want to understand humans, you should see how we actually live." The princess's eyes widened. "That sounds perfect." Their first stop was a busy market in the old part of the city. Colors, sounds, and smells mixed together as vendors called out their wares. Jack watched as Lyra took it all in: the handmade crafts, the street food, the children playing between stalls. "Everything is so different," she said, accepting a piece of sweet bread from a vendor who didn't recognize her as alien royalty. "In the Imperium, everything is ordered, designed, perfect." "Perfect sounds boring," Jack replied. She smiled at that. "Perhaps it is." They continued through the city. Jack showed her a music club where young bands played with more passion than skill. They visited an art gallery showcasing works by local artists, many depicting Earth's recovery from the climate wars of the previous century. "Your people faced destruction, yet you created beauty from it," Lyra said, studying a painting of new forests growing among the ruins of an old city. "Humans are good at finding hope in dark places," Jack said. "It's how we survived this long." By midday, they sat in a small cafe overlooking one of the city's canals. Lyra asked questions about everything: human relationships, dreams, beliefs. Jack found himself speaking more openly than he had with anyone in years. "Why did you become a soldier, Jack?" she asked. "To protect what matters," he answered simply. "My parents died in the last climate war. I wanted to make sure we never face that kind of destruction again." Lyra was quiet for a moment. "In the Imperium, careers are often decided by genetic predisposition and societal need. The concept of personal choice is limited." "That sounds like a prison," Jack said before he could stop himself. To his surprise, Lyra nodded. "A beautiful, comfortable prison is still a prison." As the day continued, they walked through one of Earth's restored wilderness areas. Jack explained how humans had nearly destroyed their planet before finally learning to live in balance with it. "Your kind almost ended yourselves, yet you changed your entire way of life to survive," Lyra said, touching the bark of an ancient oak tree. "My people haven't changed our fundamental ways in 10,000 years." "Change is scary," Jack admitted, "but sometimes necessary." As sunset approached, Jack's communicator beeped with an urgent message. Lyra's advisors were demanding her return for an emergency meeting. "I must go," she said reluctantly. "But this day, I will remember it." Back at the embassy, the head of the celestial delegation, Advisor Thorne, waited with a cold expression. "Your Highness, news has arrived from the Imperial homeworld. Your father has announced the date for your selection ceremony. All potential mates must be registered within 30 days. Lyra's face became unreadable. "I see. We depart tomorrow," Thorne continued, giving Jack a dismissive glance. "This cultural exploration is over." As they walked away, Lyra turned back to Jack. "Thank you for showing me your world," she said. Jack nodded, unaware that he had shown her much more than that. He had shown her a different way to live. The grand hall of celestial judgment stretched for nearly a mile, its crystal ceiling arching so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. Today, it was filled with thousands of spectators from across the galaxy. The selection ceremony of a celestial princess happened only once in several centuries. Princess Lyra stood on the central platform, dressed in ceremonial robes that caught the light from the 3 suns of the imperial homeworld. Around her, the celestial council members sat in rising tiers, their ancient faces showing little emotion. Emperor Zorn, Lyra's father rose from his throne. Unlike the other Celestials, whose features seemed almost too perfect, the Emperor's face showed character, lines of wisdom earned through 50,000 years of rule. Today marks the 300th selection ceremony in our imperial history. His voice echoed through the hall. Princess Lyra will choose from among the most worthy houses of the Alliance to find her mate and future co-ruler. On the platform below, representatives from 12 noble houses stood proudly. Each came from a different species that had proven their worth to the galaxy over thousands of years. Each candidate was the best their civilization had to offer, genetically perfect, extensively educated, politically connected. The candidates may now present their offerings, the Emperor announced. One by one, the suitors stepped forward. A prince of the Arcturian Dominion offered control of 1,000 star systems. A noble from the Silicon consciousness presented a newly discovered element with impossible properties. The heir to the Vega Consortium promised biological immortality treatments not even the Celestials had mastered. As the last suitor finished, Emperor Zorn turned to his daughter. Princess Lyra, you may now announce your selection pool for the Trials of Worth. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the princess to name her choices from among the 12. Instead, Lyra stepped forward with a determined expression. Honored father, esteemed council, noble representatives of the galaxy, her voice was clear and strong. I wish to include a 13th candidate in my selection pool. Murmurs spread through the crowd. A human representative from Earth. The murmurs became shouts of surprise and outrage. Humans had only been part of the Alliance for 3 years. They controlled just one star system. They had no genetic enhancements, no 1,000-year lifespans, no reality-bending technology. The Celestial Council members leaned forward in their seats, faces showing shock, the most emotion they had displayed in centuries. This is unacceptable, shouted the representative from the Arcturian Dominion. Humans are barely more than animals. Their civilization is in its infancy, added another council member. They have nothing to offer the Imperium. Emperor Zorn raised his hand, and the hall fell silent again. He studied his daughter's face carefully. Your request is unprecedented, daughter. Explain your reasoning. Lyra stood tall under the scrutiny of the entire galaxy. The Celestial Imperium has existed for over 50,000 years. In that time, we have perfected our genes, extended our lives, and mastered the physical laws of the universe. Yet we have lost something along the way, something humans still possess. And what might that be? Asked a council member with obvious skepticism. Passion, creativity, the ability to see beyond what is to what could be. These qualities cannot be measured by our traditional standards, but they may be exactly what our empire needs. The Emperor sat back in his throne, his expression unreadable. For several long moments, he considered his daughter's words while the hall remained silent. Finally, he leaned forward. The Trials of Worth exist to test candidates on qualities beyond their obvious advantages. If you believe humans possess qualities worthy of our consideration, then let them be tested like any other. He stood, addressing the crowd. A human representative may compete in the trials. If they succeed, they will earn their place in the selection. The hall erupted in voices, some outraged, some curious, some already plotting ways to ensure the human would fail. On Earth, Captain Jack Reed received an unexpected royal summons that would change his life forever. Jack stood at the viewing port of the transport ship, watching as the Imperial homeworld grew larger. He had never seen anything like it. The entire planet seemed to shimmer with an inner light, its continents reshaped into perfect geometric patterns visible even from space. Impressive, isn't it? Asked Admiral Brooks, who had accompanied Jack as Earth's official representative. They'd been engineering their planet for 50,000 years. Jack nodded, his throat dry. 1 week ago, he had been performing routine security duties. Now he was heading to compete in ancient alien trials for the hand of a princess. The whole thing felt like a dream, or a nightmare. Remember, Brooks said quietly, This isn't just about you anymore. The entire human race is being judged. The ship landed at the Imperial Spaceport, a structure so vast it made Earth's largest cities look like small towns. A delegation waited for them, led by a tall celestial with silver skin. "Captain Reed," the celestial said without warmth, "I am Advisor Thorn. The trials begin tomorrow. You will be shown to your quarters." As they walked through the city planet, Jack tried not to stare at the impossible architecture, buildings that floated without support, structures that seemed to phase in and out of reality, materials that changed properties as he watched. They passed a garden where the other candidates were gathered. When they spotted Jack, most fell silent. One, with scaled skin and eyes that glowed like embers, laughed openly. "This is the human. This is what Princess Lyra thinks worthy of consideration." The alien's translator couldn't quite capture the contempt in his voice. Jack kept walking, his face neutral. He had faced worse in military training. His quarters were luxurious by human standards, though probably modest by Imperial ones. As soon as Advisor Thorn left, Jack's communication device activated. Princess Lyra's face appeared in the hologram. "Jack, you came. Did I have a choice?" he asked, then immediately regretted his tone. "I mean, when a princess summons you across the galaxy." She smiled slightly. "I apologize for the lack of warning. Events moved quickly after my return." "Why me, Lyra? I'm not a diplomat or a scientist. I'm just a soldier." Her expression grew serious. "Because you showed me something rare. The candidates tomorrow will demonstrate power, wealth, intelligence, but you showed me humanity." Before Jack could ask what she meant, the communication ended. The next morning, Jack stood with 12 alien candidates in the arena of trials. Each was a physical specimen that made him feel inadequate, taller, stronger, enhanced with biotechnology beyond human understanding. Emperor Zorn addressed the gathered crowd. "For 10,000 years, the trials of worth have tested those who would join our royal line. Today we witnessed the first human to attempt them." The first trial was physical. Each candidate had to cross a chasm on a narrow bridge, while avoiding energy bolts fired from floating drones. The other candidates leaped with supernatural agility, or used personal force fields to deflect the energy. When Jack's turn came, he had none of these advantages. Instead, he watched the pattern of the drones, timing their firing sequence. Then he ran, ducked, rolled, and used every bit of his military training to avoid being hit. He wasn't graceful like the others, but he made it across. The crowd murmured in surprise. The second trial tested intelligence. Each candidate faced a crystal puzzle that rearranged itself constantly. While the aliens used advanced mathematical algorithms or telepathic abilities, Jack approached it differently. He noticed the puzzle responded to emotions. When he felt frustrated, it became more complex. When he calmed himself, focused on positive memories of Earth, the crystal stabilized long enough for him to solve it. By the end of the day, Jack had passed 3 trials where everyone expected him to fail. He returned to his quarters exhausted but proud. That night, he received another message, not from Lyra, but from an unknown source. "Watch your back, human. Not everyone wants you to succeed." Jack smiled grimly. That, at least, was something familiar. Every competition had its politics. He just hadn't expected to be playing this game on a galactic scale. News of Jack's unexpected success in the first trials spread quickly across the galaxy. On Earth, humans gathered around screens to watch their representative compete against beings they had once thought of as gods. Jack had become a symbol overnight, proof that humanity belonged among the stars. In his quarters, Jack nursed his injuries from the day's challenges. His body ached in ways he hadn't experienced since his toughest military training. A soft chime announced a visitor at his door. "Enter," he called, expecting another medical droid. Instead, a hooded figure slipped inside and quickly closed the door. When they lowered their hood, Jack recognized Princess Lyra. though she wore simple clothing with none of her royal markings. "You shouldn't be here," Jack said, standing despite his pain. "The rules." "The rules were written by those who now wish to break them," Lyra said quietly. "I had to warn you personally. Your life is in danger." Jack smiled grimly. "I got that impression when my breathing mask failed during the underwater trial today." "That was no accident." Lyra's eyes flashed with anger. "The Arcturian candidate has powerful friends on the council. They fear what your success represents." "And what's that?" Jack asked. "Change." She moved to the window, looking out at the endless cityscape. "For thousands of years, power in this galaxy has remained with the same species, the same families. Humans represent something new, unpredictable." Jack joined her at the window. "We tend to have that effect. My father's advisors are pressuring him to disqualify you. 3 Alliance members have threatened to withdraw if a human is allowed to continue." She turned to face him. "Even my father cannot ignore such pressure forever." Jack considered this. "So they're afraid. Good. That means we're doing something right." Lyra looked surprised, then laughed softly. "This is why I chose you, Jack. Any other being would be planning their retreat." Before Jack could respond, his communication device activated with an urgent message. Admiral Brooks appeared, his face grave. "Captain, we have a situation. The Vega Consortium has just announced trade sanctions against Earth. They claim it's unrelated to the trials, but the timing is no coincidence." Jack's jaw tightened. "They're punishing Earth for my participation." "It gets worse," Brooks continued. "There have been protests at our embassies on 6 different worlds, some violent. They're calling humans upstarts who don't know their place." After the Admiral's message ended, Jack paced the room. "I should withdraw. I can't let Earth suffer because of me." "If you withdraw, they win," Lyra said firmly. "This is exactly what they want, to force your hand by threatening your people. What choice do I have? I'm just one person." Lyra took his hands in hers. Her skin was cool to the touch, almost electric. "You are more than that now, Jack. You've become a symbol of humanity's potential, of change in a stagnant galaxy." "Symbols don't protect people from trade sanctions or violence," Jack argued. "No," Lyra agreed, "but they can inspire change that lasts far longer than any single battle." She squeezed his hands. "Tomorrow is the diplomacy trial. It will test your ability to navigate galactic politics. If you succeed, even my father's advisors cannot deny your right to continue." After Lyra left, Jack couldn't sleep. He stood at the window watching the never-ending flow of lights from vehicles moving through the Imperial City. Somewhere in those lights were beings plotting his failure, or worse. His communication device chimed again. This time, it was a message from Earth. Thousands of messages. Actually, people from all over his planet sending their support. Children's drawings, veteran salutes, simple words of encouragement. Jack straightened his shoulders. He had faced worse odds before. And now he wasn't fighting just for himself, or even for Princess Lyra. He was fighting for humanity's place among the stars. 5 days of trials had reduced the original 13 candidates to only 3. Jack, the Arcturian prince named Dorn, and a being of pure energy from the silicon consciousness called Vex. Today they would face the legendary Labyrinth of Souls, the final and most dangerous challenge. The 3 finalists stood before a massive structure that seemed to shift and change even as Jack looked at it. Unlike the gleaming architecture of the rest of the Imperial City, the labyrinth was made of dark stone that absorbed light. Emperor Zorn addressed them personally, his ancient eyes studying each candidate. For 10,000 years, the labyrinth has tested the character of those who would join our royal line. It will show you your deepest fears, your greatest weaknesses. Some have emerged changed forever. Others have not emerged at all. Jack felt a chill despite the warm air. "You will each enter through a different gate," the Emperor continued. "The first to reach the center and retrieve the crystal of truth will be declared the winner." Princess Lyra stood beside her father, her face carefully neutral, but when her eyes met Jack's, he saw worry there. The three gates opened simultaneously. Jack took a deep breath and stepped into darkness. Inside, the air felt heavy, almost alive. The walls pulsed gently, as if breathing. Jack moved forward cautiously, using his military training to map his route. After what seemed like hours, he reached a chamber where the path split in three directions. Before he could choose, the air shimmered, and he saw his parents as they had been before the climate wars. Healthy, smiling. His heart ached with longing. "You could have us back," his mother's image said. "The Imperium has the technology to retrieve consciousness from the past. Choose the right path, win the princess, and we could live again." Jack's hand trembled as he reached toward the vision. Then he stopped. This wasn't what his parents would want, not if it meant compromising who he was. "You're not real," he said firmly, "and my parents would want me to move forward, not try to bring back the past." The vision faded, and one of the three paths began to glow slightly. Jack took it without hesitation. The next chamber held a different challenge. Jack found the Arcturian prince, Dorn, trapped beneath a fallen column, badly injured. "Help me, human," Dorn growled, his pride clearly hurt by needing assistance. Jack hesitated. This was the same being who had tried to sabotage him, who had called humans primitive apes. If he left Dorn here, his path to victory would be clearer. "What are you waiting for?" Dorn asked. "Your revenge." Jack shook his head and moved to lift the column. "That's not how humans do things. At least, not how we should do things." Together, they managed to free the alien prince. Dorn studied Jack with new eyes. "I would have left you to die." "I know," Jack replied simply. Dorn nodded slowly. "Take the left passage. It's faster." Jack continued through the labyrinth, facing more tests, some of courage, others of compassion, still others of wisdom. In one chamber, he found Vex attempting to absorb the life force of smaller creatures to increase its power. Jack intervened, showing that strength didn't have to come at the expense of others. Finally, Jack reached what he sensed was the center of the labyrinth. There, on a pedestal, glowed the crystal of truth. But as he approached, Princess Lyra appeared before him, her eyes filled with tears. "If you take the crystal, war will break out across the galaxy," she said. "The old powers will never accept a human in the royal line. Billions will die because of your pride." Jack stopped, his hand inches from the crystal. Was this another test, or the truth? "Sometimes," he said carefully, "doing the right thing isn't about winning. It's about showing there's another way." Instead of taking the crystal, Jack stepped back. "I didn't come here to start a war. I came to prove humans belong in this galaxy. That we have something to offer. If taking this crystal means blood and death, then the price is too high." As he turned to leave, the false Lyra vanished, and the real crystal of truth began to glow brighter than before. A voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves spoke. The true test was never about reaching the prize first. It was about being worthy of it. The crystal floated from its pedestal into Jack's hands. The grand hall of celestial judgment fell silent as Jack emerged from the labyrinth, the crystal of truth glowing in his hands. Emperor Zorn rose from his throne, his ancient face showing genuine surprise for perhaps the first time in thousands of years. "A human completes the trials," he announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "The first in the history of our Imperium." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Shock, outrage, and from some corners, a new feeling: respect. Advisor Thorne stepped forward, his silver face tight with disapproval. "Your Majesty, while the human has technically completed the trials, we must consider the political implications. 3 Alliance members have already threatened to withdraw if—" The Emperor raised his hand, silencing the advisor. "The trials have spoken. Captain Jack Reed has earned his place in the selection." Princess Lyra stepped forward, her eyes meeting Jack's across the chamber. There was something in her expression he hadn't seen before, not just admiration, but something deeper. As is tradition, Emperor Zorn continued, Princess Lyra will now make her choice from among the successful candidates. The remaining alien candidates stood proudly. Despite their earlier contempt, even they had to acknowledge Jack's achievement. The Arcturian prince, Dorn, gave Jack a slight nod of recognition. Princess Lyra spoke, her voice clear and strong. The purpose of the selection is to choose the best possible future for the Imperium. For 10,000 years, we have valued power, technology, and genetic perfection. She paused, looking directly at Jack. Yet in all that time, we have not grown wiser, only older. We have not become kinder, only more controlled. She turned to face the assembled crowd. Through these trials, I have seen a different path. Captain Jack Reed has shown courage not born from physical superiority, but from moral conviction. He has shown compassion for rivals who would have destroyed him. He has demonstrated that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from lifting them up. The Emperor studied his daughter with new eyes, as if seeing her fully for the first time. I choose Jack Reed of Earth, Lyra announced, not despite his humanity, but because of it. The hall erupted in a cacophony of voices. Jack stood stunned, the crystal still warm in his hands. This wasn't what he had expected when he first met the princess at that diplomatic reception that now seemed a lifetime ago. The Emperor raised his hands, and silence gradually returned. Daughter, are you certain? This choice will change the course of the Imperium forever. That, Lyra said firmly, is precisely why I make it. Jack was escorted to the central platform, where he stood beside Lyra. Up close, he could see the emotion in her eyes, something rare among the controlled Celestials. I didn't come here looking for this, he said quietly to her. I know, she replied. That's part of why you are worthy of it. Emperor Zorn stepped forward, addressing Jack directly. Captain Reed, do you understand what this means? You will be bound to the Imperium to help guide the oldest civilization in the known galaxy. Jack thought of Earth, of humanity's brief but passionate history. I understand that I will be a bridge between our peoples. Humans have much to learn from the Imperium, but perhaps we have something to offer as well. The Emperor studied Jack for a long moment, then smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his ancient face. Perhaps we engineered our genes too perfectly, refined our emotions too carefully. We created a society without chaos, but also without growth. He placed his hands on both Jack and Lyra's shoulders. The trials revealed what I had begun to suspect, that the future of the Imperium lies not in perfect continuity, but in beneficial change. The formal announcement went out across the galaxy. On thousands of worlds, beings of all kinds watched as the celestial princess and her human mate were formally united. On Earth, humans celebrated their sudden elevation in galactic status. But more importantly, they recognized that Jack and Lyra represented something profound. A future where different species could learn from each other, where ancient wisdom and youthful energy could combine to create something new. As Jack and Lyra stood together before the galaxy, the crystal of truth still glowed between them, a symbol of honesty, courage, and a new beginning for all.